elections, since those are coming up, I'm going to try to go through the basics really quickly and then give you guys a chance to ask any questions that you have. Feel free to put something in the chat if you have a question, or I'm going to have a break for questions along the way. If you think I'm going too fast or too slow, you can put that in the chat also. I just want to make sure that, you know, I use your time well, and don't make you sit here and listen to something that you've heard before. So first thing we're going to talk about is elections. Since things will be a little bit different this year, since we're doing it virtually, it's mostly going to be similar, but I will be touching on some of the things that we might have to do differently because of teleconferencing. Okay, so before the election, this is an overview of the steps leading up to the election. Most of these things should have taken place already or be happening now. By now, you should have elected your nominating committee at an association meeting, unless you're having your election very late. There are a couple schools that are in March and April. If just a note, if you were having trouble with getting people to serve on your nominating committee, since I know some people are having trouble getting volunteers in this virtual world that we're living in. If you do not get all of the members that you're required to have in your bylaws, you cannot actually have a nominating committee. You'll have to do all your nominating from the floor. So if you're having trouble, you can reach out to me. If you're late and you didn't do it within the 60 days before your election, there's some things we can do about that in terms of making sure that, you know, you're within the timeline that you can reach out to me if that's the case, and we'll kind of work that out. And then you should be sending some notices out to your members soon, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So instructions to your nominating committee. Your parliamentarian will meet with your nominating committee again. Hopefully this has already happened. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. A couple of points of note, though. There is only one person that is allowed to be elected to per office. PTA does not allow co-officers, so you can only have one nominee for each office. So if you are having trouble getting people to sign up, and sometimes, you know, people say, well, I will help, but I need somebody to do it with me. That's totally fine. But you cannot elect those two people. You need to have one person who says, I'll be the one who's elected to take that position. And then the other person can be appointed as a committee chair. You can have standing committee chairs, or you can actually have an assistant for that person. The board is allowed to create as many committees as you want. So if, you know, that VP is over like 5 different things, you can have a committee for each one of those things and multiple things, and that's fine. Your standing committees are listed in your bylaws under standing rule number 17, and it is specified in your bylaws which committees are standing committees. Those are the ones that function all year round. The difference is that the standing committee chair is actually a member of your board, and they do have voting rights, whereas other committee chairs do not. So they are not supposed to be at your meeting unless they're invited as a guest, and they don't get a vote, and they don't count in your quorum. And if you want to have an assistant, you can also vote to have an assistant or appoint an assistant for them with or without voting rights, either way. Those two things, if they're going to be standing committee chairs or assistants, need to be put in your bylaws or your standing rules of your bylaws. Okay, all nominees must be members of your association for 30 days before nomination in order to be eligible to be elected. If they're not, then your election could be considered, election of them could be considered null and void. This, if they're a member of another unit, say like if you're middle school or high school and you're recruiting from elementary or middle school, that's fine as long as they become a member as soon as you nominate them. Okay. If you have trouble finding people, you still need to post your slate 28 days before the election. So don't hold off thinking, oh, we just have to find this last person. You need to post it. And we say post, but actually I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. You could just go ahead and post it with the position saying open, and then continue to work to find someone to fill that position. Okay. Okay. All right. So duties of the nominating committee. I just want to mention here that the chairperson of the nominating committee needs to get the form, the report of the nominating committee signed by all of the members. So we did ask the captive parliamentarian, and you cannot just type in the names. You need to actually get a signature. You can do the wet signature thing if you want, or you can have email it out, have them sign it, scan it, send it to the next person, print it, sign it, scan it. You can do it that way, or you can use an electronic signature as long as it's one that authenticates the signature. And then when you post those, please do not include the signatures when you send it out via email or when you put it on your website, because we don't want to have those signatures out in the wind to be used by anyone. And also, but the signed copy does need to be given to the recording secretary when you have your actual election. So your annual election meeting. In your bylaws, you'll find the month that it's supposed to be held in Article 5, and the day of the month that it's supposed to be held on is going to be in your standing rules under Article 10. You must give your written notice to your members. So like I mentioned before, we often say post, because when we were meeting in person, you could put it on the bulletin board and, you know, all the people that are dropping off their kids and picking them up are going to see it. Well, now nobody's going to be there to see it. So we need to actually send a written notice to your members, and you can send it via email. You can post it on your website. I want to say it's probably best to also email it, because a lot of our websites sometimes, you know, you have to dig to find that information. You have to go to the PTA page, and then you have to click under this or that in order to find it. So if it's tucked away in your website, it's not on the front page, you should send an email. It's generally a good idea to send an email anyways, just to ensure that all your members receive it. You can have your principal send an email for you. If you're using Totem and you've entered all the emails in there, that's a really great way to make sure that your members get it. You're not required to actually let your entire school know. It's just a way to cover to make sure that everybody gets it. But if you have an actual list of members, then you can just send it to them. That's fine. Notice of the election meeting has to be sent 30 days before your meeting, and your nominating committee report must be sent 28 days before. So you can send those together, which is probably a good idea since they're all related. You must include the date, the time, and the location of your meeting. And the location now is going to be via whatever teleconferencing you're using, Zoom or whatever. And then when you send your email, you need to make sure to include the details of how they're going to be able to get in. Make sure that you're very clear if they have to RSVP and get a link and these kinds of things. Make sure to include those details as well. Okay, so we have sent our notices, we've submitted our report, then we come to our actual meeting. The secretary needs to have a current copy of the members list, because only members are entitled to vote. We say have ballots ready, but in this case, you know, you can't really hand out pieces of paper, so I'll talk about that a little bit more later. The parliamentarian is going to read the bylaws, the nominating committee chair is going to read the report, and then the president is going to conduct the vote. We are required to take nominations from the floor by our bylaws. Honestly, we usually have trouble just finding enough people to fill the positions. So for most of you, this is just going to be a formality. But in case you have too many eager volunteers or some potential conflict, which does sometimes happen, then we need to take nominations from the floor to ensure that members have a voice in who represents them on the board. So here are some things that you're going to need to check. You want to make sure that anyone who makes a nomination is a paid member for at least 30 days. So here again is where you have that handy dandy membership list. Also, your nominees have to be a member for at least 30 days. and they must give their consent. So when somebody nominates them, they can nominate themselves. They have, the president has to confirm that they're willing to serve. We can't just nominate, Joe Blow because we like them and really want them to do the job. They don't want to do the job, we can't elect them. If they're not there to give their consent, they must have given their consent in writing. And then also we need to make sure that they have not served the 2-year term limit. That's one of the things that automatically invalidates the vote. So CAPTA has recommended a couple of ways to expedite nominations from the floor so that you can try to prepare ahead, because again, we can't just pull out slips of paper and say, hey, write down the person's name. We have to do a lot more work to set up an electronic voting and all of that. So one suggestion was to have those who want to run from the floor announce their intention at the beginning of the teleconference. This gives you time to get the ballot ready. The other suggestion they had was to put it in your meeting notice that if they're interested in running, that they should declare their intent and whatever procedure you want them to follow in order to do that within a certain amount of time. You don't have to do these things. These are just suggestions that CAPTA has made to try to give you a little more time to prepare. We are working on ways to actually do the ballot vote during a virtual situation. So I will definitely be able to help you if you have any questions or if you think that this might be something that will be happening at your unit. Please definitely reach out to me because there's a couple of things we need to consider, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so when it comes to the vote, if there are no additional nominees, I see that there's some. Yes, you will get a copy of this presentation. Thanks. All right. Is email good enough for consent in writing? Yes, email is good enough for consent in writing. Yes, sorry. Should be monitoring this a little better. Okay. All right. So the vote. If there are no additional nominations from the floor, then you can hold a voice vote. I have distributed a script which is slightly modified for virtual this year. But if there are more than one nominee for each office, you must have a ballot vote. In addition, if a member has the ability to call for a ballot vote, even if there's only one nominee. Now, this rarely ever occurs, but if it does occur, it is the president's job to take a vote immediately. There's no discussion, no second needed. The president would say, it has been moved to take a ballot vote. All those in favor say aye, any opposed? And then if the majority of the people present want to have a ballot vote, then you would need to have a ballot vote. And if it's either for a specific office or for the entire thing, as long as your quorum is met. So the reason being, you may be thinking, why would we want to have a ballot vote if there's only one person? Because there's only one person that can be elected. But the person who is being elected needs to have a majority vote. So people can actually vote and put in a blank ballot, which does not count towards the vote, but you have to have a majority of the people present who are eligible to vote in order to elect someone. So for instance, if we had 50 people present who could vote, 25 people put in a blank ballot, you would not be able to elect that person, even if they were the only ones who was nominated. And you can also do a combination, which would be, you can have a voice vote for those who have only one nominee, and then you would do a ballot vote just for the ones who had more than one. Okay, so here's the procedure. Again, as I mentioned, if the ballot vote is anticipated, you want to let us know, and then we'll make sure to be there, be prepared to assist you with the election and your ballot vote, and even to conduct it for you. One thing that I would recommend is that you verify your members as they enter into your meeting, just because this will help to satisfy one of the requirements, which is to be a member in order to vote. You'll want to have an electronic ballot prepared ahead of time. It's recommended use something like the Zoom poll or Google Form or SurveyMonkey. Your tellers are going to be appointed by your president. You need 3. One will be the chair, and then you'll have 2 additional tellers. You can decide who those people are going to be ahead of time, but you're not going to announce it until the time of the meeting. Tellers are the ones who normally distribute, collect, and count the ballots. In our case, we're not actually passing out ballots, but it'll be, distributing the virtual form. And then the tellers will basically be verifying the vote via the electronic, whatever means it is. In addition, the nominees are able to have an observer. So they are not allowed to be a teller, but they can appoint somebody to be an observer and be there when the tellers review the ballots and count the ballots to make sure that they feel that everything is fair. Okay. So in the process, the president calls for a count of the House, which is where normally people stand up and you count everybody who's eligible to vote. But in our case, the tellers will count everybody who's in the meeting if you've only allowed members into your meeting, or those who are eligible to vote. If you don't have a membership list, you must let everyone or all adults who are in your meeting vote. Okay, so if you're going to have a contested vote and you're concerned about that, you want to make sure to have that membership list available. And the teller's duties are to count the votes, to check for illegal votes. So a lot of this is going to be not as necessary if you're using an electronic ballot. The 4 things that you need to do is your vote needs to be anonymous. It's 1 vote per person. You need to be a member. Oh my goodness, I'm blanking on what the last thing was. Okay. All right, so when you do your vote, you're going to want to make sure that you set up your electronic ballot so that people can only submit one vote. This will avoid duplicates. There are some complications. This is why if you are going to do an electronic ballot, it would be great for you to reach out and talk to me about it, because if you send an email, then you may not necessarily be able to make sure that that person is in the meeting, or that that person is a member, or that they maybe didn't share, or if you send a link, that they maybe didn't share the link with someone else. So there are a lot of things to consider when using the virtual ballot. So I have prepared the script, the first 3 pages, and Kami has mentioned that it is on the website, so you can download it. I see people straining to read it. If you want to share it, Kami, you can. But I have created this file so that you don't actually have to fill it in every single time. There are like 3 places where the names go, where you have to read the names 3 times. So the PDF is made so that when you fill it in here, it's going to automatically populate it 3 times for you, so you don't have to type it 3 times. This is a pretty standard script. It's basically the same as the one that we use during regular school time. And there's not too much different here. Where we have a difference is when we come to the point of doing the ballot vote. So this 4th page is handling nominations from the floor. It's basically going to be an if-then kind of situation. So you'll see if people make your nomination from the floor, you check to see, are they actually a member? If they're not a member, then you say, I'm sorry, only members can make nominations. If they are a member, then they will need to state who they're nominating, and then you need to check to make sure that person is eligible. Have they been a member for 30 days, etc.? And if they are not, and they haven't met all the things that are listed here, then you would declare them ineligible. If they are eligible, you'll ask them if they want to accept the nomination. There's no second required. And if they are nominated, if they accept the nomination, then you add them to the ballot, and then the president will declare that a ballot vote is needed. Okay, I didn't actually post the actual one here. This is the instructions on how to handle the ballot vote, but I have also included in the handout that you can download from our website a script for the ballot vote, which kind of goes through basically these same things here. And finally, the conclusion of the vote. So you'll conduct your electronic ballot. I would recommend you probably send your tellers and your observers into a breakout room in your Zoom. If you're using Zoom, they can review the results. The chairman of the tellers committee is going to write those down. They need to give the results to the president in writing. The president will read that. They're not going to actually read the entire thing out loud. You're going to share how many people were eligible to vote, how many votes were actually tallied, what is the required number for the majority, and then announce who is the winner. Generally, we don't announce the actual number of votes that each person got unless somebody requests it. If they do request it, then you can say. After the announcement of the vote, the chairman of the tellers committee is going to move to destroy the ballots, okay, and then you're going to vote on that. And then finally, if there are any challenges to the vote, they must occur during the meeting, except for, as I said before, if the person is ineligible for the office, then after the fact at any point, that election would be considered null and void.
Diane, you have a question.
I have a question. Thank you. Is the PTA required to accept any nominee from the floor? So any nominee that meets the requirements as having been a member for 30 days, and any other requirements. Let me go back to this one here. Okay, so according to the rules in the bylaws, they must be members for at least 30 days, and they must, or if they were from another association, they need to have joined your association. They have to have signified their consent. If they are going to be the president, the treasurer, the financial secretary, the auditor, or a check signer, they can't be related by blood or marriage or live in the same household, and they can't have served in that office for 2 or more years. Other than that, there are no, they must be accepted as a nominee and given a chance to be voted into the office. And then how do you destroy electronic ballots? So it depends on what system you're using, but basically you're going to, there are a lot of systems out there where you can actually destroy, clear the vote, but you'll have to probably delete the file. If you do a Zoom one, I think you can delete it from in there. All right, so a note about open positions after the vote. So say you didn't ever get any nominees and you asked for nominees from the floor and nobody volunteered, then that's fine. You would continue your election and that position would still be open. So any unfilled positions after the elections will be elected by the board-elect. The president-elect would call a meeting of the board-elect, and they would vote to elect the incoming, any officers that would fill those positions. So when you put it in your minutes, be sure to write elect, not appointed or ratified. It's not up to the president to decide who that person is. They will need to be elected by a majority vote of all of the officers if you give the board 10 days notice. So if you have 15 members, but only 13 people can come to your meeting, you still have to count the majority of the 15, which would be 8, okay, as opposed to 7. If you don't give notice, then you need a 2/3 vote of all your officers in order to elect the next people. If your president has not been elected, then the executive vice president, if you have one, or the first VP would call the meeting of the board elect. All right. Do you have any more questions about elections? Yes, Monique.
Well, with regard to qualifying for the position, what if, for instance, like in our standing rules, we have that the president has to have served on the executive board of either our school or one of the feeder schools in the year prior, or would be the current year, to serve next year. So if, for instance, someone nominates themselves or somebody else to that position, that's not something that they would necessarily know is a requirement. How would we handle telling them or asking them? Or
Sure, that's a great question. So if it's in your standing rules that you have certain requirements for certain offices, then that would apply. And then you would have to say, and this person is not eligible because in standing rule, blah, 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 and then read that standing rule so that they would know what the requirement was. So they would not be eligible to serve in that office, but they could be nominated for another office.
okay. And so at that point, when they're nominated, we would just make that response immediately if we know that they are not eligible at that point?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It would be the same as if they weren't a member or any other thing. You would state the reason why they're not eligible and then cite that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I see Judy's raising her hand. Yes, Judy.
Hello. I guess there's been a debate about if the parliamentarian can serve on the nominating committee. Years ago, I was told that they can't. Now I was hearing someone mention that they shouldn't be. Is there a rule if the parliamentarian can or cannot serve on the nominating committee?
Then the parliamentarian can absolutely serve on the nominating committee. They must be elected to the nominating committee just like everybody else, and they can only serve 1 year at a time. So if they served last year, then the next year they cannot serve again.
Okay, for some reason, some of the units, they were told by someone, I'm like, who's telling you that? Because as far as I knew, if the nominating committee cannot get the last person, usually the parliamentarian will kind of jump in and be the 5th person, if you will. So, okay, I just want to clear that up.
That's fine as long as they hadn't served the year before.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I see a question on the chat from Dina. Can a board operate without all positions filled? Are there certain positions that must be filled? That's a very good question. Yes, you may operate without all positions filled. Yes, there are certain positions that must be filled, and the 3 positions that you must have in order to even have a PTA is the president, the recording secretary, and the treasurer. Any other positions can be left open for a period of time, but it's always best to try to fill them as soon as you can. So if you aren't able to fill them in the current year, you can always continue to try to find someone even as you start your next school year. Okay. All right, is there any other questions about elections? So I have actually done some extensive research about electronic ballots and all of that. So if you need any help or if you think that you're going to have any trouble with that, please let me know and I'll be happy to help you with that. Okay. All right. Moving on, then I'm going to talk about bylaws. So we've gone over some of this stuff in the fall, so I don't want to bore you with too many things that you've already heard, but this is basically there's 2 parts to the bylaws, the actual bylaws and then the standing rules. basically within the bylaws themselves, these come from CAPTA, and there's very little room for changes on this part of it. Most of those things come from either CAPTA's bylaws themselves or from tax law or nonprofit law, which are things that we must abide by. And any changes that we make to the body of the bylaws must be approved by CAPTA. Okay, the standing rules are basically how you function as a unit yourself, the way that you guys conduct things. And it's the how you do things, right? It doesn't have to be super detailed, but this is the way you pass on information to your future board members. So for instance, if you ever did a job and you made a great procedures book and you passed it on to somebody and they took out all the pages and then it only, half of the pages got to the next person, this is a way that you can actually put in, like, what are the things that these people are supposed to do? What is this chair supposed to do? How are they supposed to do it? These are the things that you can put in your bylaws that you can pass on. Now, it's obviously not going to be a whole book, but, you want to kind of pick out the most important things and the guidelines for overall and put that in there. All right, so the bylaws review. So there is a form called the four easy steps to bylaws review. It's in the bylaws packet that's on the website. Basically, you have a committee and you're supposed to actually review them every year. Sometimes we don't actually get around to reviewing them every year. You are required for sure to update them at least every 5 years, and that's a change. It used to be 3. So, and part of that I think is because they made the form a lot shorter. So, any pertinent changes need to be made, and whenever you change anything in the body of the bylaws, or if you have your 5-year update, it has to go through CAPTA. Okay, this is the bylaws worksheet, and this is a handy thing to fill out all the information that you're going to need to put into your bylaws, especially if you're using e-bylaws. These are all the things that you're going to need. Most of these things can be found in your current bylaws. I'm not going to go through that. And then at the beginning of the bylaws form, the PDF, or if you print it via e-bylaws, there'll be instructions for completing the standard bylaws. These are actually very useful steps on how to fill it out. It has some very specific information in there about quorums, how do you calculate your quorum and things like that. And so if you want to, you can either choose to use e-bylaws, which is on the CAPTA website, or the fillable PDF that you'll get from me in order to do your bylaws. Currently, I understand that e-bylaws is having some trouble because they did an Adobe Flash update. So if you're trying to do your bylaws right now, you're probably better off using the PDF form. But if you do use e-bylaws, it will fill in all the information for you. I put it here, but I'll send you guys the file so that I don't have to go through. These are just basically the steps about how to find e-bylaws. When you get to e-bylaws, if you've never used it before, you're going to need to create a username and they'll send you a password. Or again, you can use the fillable form. So I have created a specific form for Torrance Council, that one for the incorporated units and one for unincorporated units. So you want to use the one that applies to you because I've already filled in some things and marked out some things that don't apply. What's new? There's not too much new in the 2020 bylaws, except for the allowance for association meetings via teleconferencing. That's the big thing in the 2020 bylaws. So if you want to have your meetings via teleconferencing, either your board, your committees, or your association, after the whole pandemic thing is done, then you're going to want to update your bylaws to the 2020 form, because once we get to the end of the year and that special provision is over, you will not be allowed to have your meetings via teleconferencing anymore. So it was actually in the 2019 form as an option for board and committees, but if you used e-bylaws, it automatically lined it out for you so that it wasn't really an option. So if you have the 2019 version, you might have it in there. You could check. There was a few clarifications about the audit review committee in the 2020 bylaws. That's pretty much it. So from the 2019 form, some people are still using the 2018 form or earlier. The 2019 form and later is much more concise. And so now you have to go to CAPTA to look for all of those specific things related to any office. Anything that is in the CAPTA toolkit automatically applies and must be followed by your unit. So what should you change when your bylaws are revised? You're going to fill in any blanks that are open. There are words in italics. When I'm going through, I usually scan for the italics. Italics are optional items or instructions. So usually it's something that you need to decide whether you're going to cross it out or not, or whether you want to fill something in. There are some rules that apply to out of council units, which you don't have to worry about because we're all in council, or incorporated units have special things that they have to do. You need to make sure to line those out with a single line and then write in any changes if you're going to make any changes. But note that anything with stars on it can't be changed at all. Okay. Dues changes. If you are going to change your dues, you must change them in your bylaws, and it has to be approved by CAPTA before you actually make the change. Not only does it have to be approved by CAPTA, but it has to be adopted by your association. So all those things have to happen before you can actually change your dues. And there are special rules that apply. You can actually have student dues or teacher dues or family dues, but there are special rules that apply to those. You can't just decide to make it whatever. They have to be at least a minimum of the amount that goes to state, district, and council. Okay, I mentioned already that co-officers are not allowed, and I also talked about standing committees. So I do want to mention that, though, if you are reviewing your bylaws, take a look at those standing committees, because I'm finding that a lot of people's standing committees aren't really making any sense to what they actually do in practice. So take a look and see. Standing committees would be people that you want to have sitting in your board all year round. You want them to have input and you want them to have a vote. Your standing rules should have actually 4 sets of standing rules. You should have 2 pages that comes from CAPTA that comes with the bylaws form. There is 1 page from 33rd District, 1 page from Torrance Council, and your unit should actually have your own standing rules, which I mentioned before. I want to say that probably more than half of the units in Torrance don't have their own standing rules. So if you're a parliamentarian and you're like interested in helping your unit out to create some, that would be great. And if you want some assistance with that, you can let me know. Yeah, sometimes they have these blank pages and I was like, why do we have to put so many in between? You don't actually have to have blank pages, but if you do have like a backside that is blank, it has to say that the page is left intentionally blank. Okay, so the process for the bylaws is that you need to approve it at your board first, then you submit it to me or to the council parliamentarian, and I look at it. If there's anything that isn't going to be allowed, I send it back to you and I ask you to fix it. Then I send it on to 33rd District. Then they send it to CAPTA. CAPTA gives the final approval. They send it back to 33rd District. They send it back to me. Then I give it to you. And then when you get it back, you have to give 30 days notice to your association that you're going to approve the bylaws. If you don't have 30 days before your next meeting, you can wait until the following meeting. Unless it's particularly urgent, you can call a special meeting for that. Your association needs to vote to adopt the changes at the meeting. And then your president and your recording secretary need to sign and date that copy. It is, let's see, where is it? It is this page right here, the signature page. That page needs to be signed and dated the day that your association adopts it by your president and your recording secretary. The president, your recording secretary, and your parliamentarian gets a copy of the wet signature. And then you also need to send a copy to council, and I will share that with 33rd District. Because we're currently staying at home, they're doing everything by email. So when you send it to me, you can just email it to me. An electronic copy is fine. I don't need a hard copy or a wet signature. You're going to use this form here, which is the bylaws submittal form. Let's see. On the second page of that bylaws submittal form is the amendments sheet. Any changes that you make. So this often gets confusing. So because the forms are different, if you're changing something from the 2017 form to the 2020 form, there might be a lot of things that actually change, but you don't have to list all those things on the amendments. Only the things, so anything that's in the form itself is already considered accepted. Okay, so if you make a change, like something that you wrote in before, like your dues, or you change the month of your meeting, or the number of people on your nominating committee, those are the changes that need to go on your amendments sheet. Or if you write something in, that needs to go on your amendments sheet. And those should be in chronological order, listing the page number, the article number, and the section number of the actual 2020 form that you're using this year, not the previous form. And then your pages need to be numbered consecutively. So when you get to this, to the standing rules, when you put in your standing rule pages, that needs to follow the last page number of the Torrance Council standing rules. And the standing rules are in number order all the way through. So when you get to your unit, you don't want to restart your numbering, you want to continue your numbering after Torrance Council. I already talked about adopting your bylaws, and that's it. So does anybody have any questions about bylaws review or making changes to your bylaws? Yep, great. So I'm always available. I'm happy to answer any question, big or small. If you want to ask me something, anything is fine. No question is too small. I'm happy to check your bylaws for you before you submit it to your board, just to make sure that everything is looking good, so you don't have to go back and forth about it. Just feel free to reach out to me. I think Kami has a survey she wants to share with you, and if nobody else has any questions, then I'm good.
Diane, can we just add this question? What happens at the election, obviously, if there's no president or treasurer or recording secretary that's on the slate? And of course, June 30th is the last day of the term. What happens if one of those three positions that need to be filled is not filled by June 30th? And in that case, what happens? Or what should the unit do to try to get somebody to fill that position?
Yeah, it's very imperative that you get those three positions filled. If you don't have those three positions filled, as I mentioned, you are not actually allowed to have a PTA. So you would have to work really hard to find someone, or we would have to disband your PTA, which would be very unfortunate. So if you have that scenario where you're having one of those offices that's not filled, you want to let us know so we can help you. You can move people around. So say you've elected, a bunch of people, and you've convinced someone that they want to be president instead of, parliamentarian or correspondent, whatever. That person can resign from their office and then be elected as the new officer, but you need to make sure that you fill those three positions.
Thank you, because I know it's been difficult with a lot of PTA units with COVID to get volunteers. So we just want to make sure that, you are aware of the situation, and that please let us know, Diane. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Denise. I'm the council president. So welcome, and thank you, Diane, for putting such a wonderful workshop together. And again, if there's any questions, reach out to Diane or myself, because we don't want to have you wait until May and saying, uh-oh, here we are, I don't know what to do. As soon as your election happens, let us know if there's a problem with an individual, or if you have problems trying to fill a position, we'll try to guide you and get you to get those positions filled.
Absolutely. Thank you, Denise. So Kami, how would they do the survey? Does it just pop up on the screen or?
Yeah, when they hit the link, it'll take them to it. Someone already responded. Otherwise, I will also email it to everybody that registered and showed up.
Perfect. All right, great. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. I appreciate you taking your time out.
All right. Thanks again, Diane. And thank you, everybody. Stay safe.